I would like to prick your brain for a little bit. Who remembers the names of the 12 apostles without looking at the Bible? I didn't ask where it's found in the Bible. How many of you remember the names of the disciples of Christ?
6 are not difficult. 2
Well,
Simons, 2 James,
okay.
and 2 Judas.
Okay, that's 6.
6.
All right.
Then you have Matthew,
Matthew.
Nathaniel,
Okay.
the same Bartholomew,
Uh-huh.
the same
Andrew.
Andrew,
Okay.
Peter.
John.
Simon.
And
Oh, that's it.
who else? It's 12.
how much is it?
No, we only had 10.
Oh,
Bartholomew.
Bartholomew and
Thaddeus.
James. Did we say James?
yeah, this is James. There is one.
Thaddeus.
We have one brother that usually stands in the back.
Thomas.
Thomas. Thomas. Yeah.
Bartholomew is the same Nathaniel? No?
Yes, there are all the names. Matthew chapter 10, verse 2 through 4. Here are all the names of the disciples of Jesus Christ. You know, it's very interesting when you read about in the Bible the disciples and, you know, what is a disciple and all this. In Luke chapter 14, it tells us, verses 26 through 27, it tells us who can become a disciple. It says, if any man come to me and hate not his father, mother, and wife, and children, and brethren, and sister, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be what? My disciple. And whosoever doth not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. So there is 2 things here. You know, it's quite interesting to see that he says there, hate. Do we need to hate our father, our mother, our wife, and children, and everybody else to become a disciple? I mean, even to hate our own life? I mean, if we take it literal as it is, I mean, do you think that you're going to have a life? No, right? It's when you read it if you just read it like that in that context, you may say, oh, you know, but hate is the opposite of love, right? So how can this be applied? And also it says that we need to bear our cross. If we don't bear it, we cannot be his disciples. That is more understandable. But the other one, what is the difference? How can we balance this? You know, how can we explain this?
If you love more.
Okay, if we love more father, mother, wife, children, then Jesus, or then God, then we cannot be what? His disciples. So we have 2 things here. Okay, first, yes, we need to love them, but not above God. And second is that we need to bear our cross, and then we will be a disciples. In the same chapter, verse 33, Jesus keeps saying, so likewise, whosoever he be of you that forsaketh not all that he has, he cannot be what? My disciple. So also is calling to do what? Not to love those things that we have above more than God. Okay? So yes, we have 3 things here that we need to keep in mind in order to be a disciple of Christ. Now, going back a little bit to the disciples, tell me a little bit of not of all of them, otherwise, you know, I only have about 12 more minutes. But tell me a little bit about the character of the disciples. Were they perfect people? No. Okay. What can you tell me about Thomas? One word. Doubting. Okay. What about Nathaniel? He was also He doubted too. He had some prejudice, right? What about Andrew? What can you remember about him?
Sons of thunder.
No, that's James.
No, that's James and John. Yeah, but okay, James and John. I mean, what kind of a character did they have? They were very fiery, right? Short fuse. Yes, correct. So, when you see the people that Jesus gathered to become his disciples, we see that they were not people that were already perfect. Maybe they had only that bad trait of character, but that was bad enough. I mean, Judas was what? A thief, right? I mean, Jesus had, and the whole spectrum of maybe what characters are, a doubting, you had people that short fuse. Yes?
What if you were fishermen? Fishermen have pretty filthy language.
Okay. I don't know, but one thing we know about Peter is that he was quick to answer all the time. He was very fast.
There's another remember there was a protester like
Yeah, it was Judas.
defending the
Zealot.
The Zealot,
Simon
yes.
Zealot.
Yeah, he was we can call it, he was a terrorist. Yeah, he was. I mean, when you read what they were doing, and Jesus called a disciple of every walk of life. So we are also from different backgrounds, This is an interesting thing. But that's not my issue, the character of them right now. But the point I want to bring is that Jesus calls everyone. As bad as we may be, Jesus is calling each and every one of us. Each and every one, we can become what? A disciple. It's interesting that in the book of Acts, chapter 11, verse 25 through 26, and due to time, I will just briefly mention here that the disciples were called what? Christians, right? In Antioch. That was the first place they were called Christians. From the time of Jesus' ministry, the beginning of the ministry, 3.5, maybe now 4 years, the disciples were not called disciples anymore, but they were becoming what? Christians. And it seems like since then, the followers of Christ, they were not called disciples, but they were called what? Christians. It's interesting that in the book of Acts, in chapter 9, verse 36, it mentions that in Joppa there was a certain disciple named what? Tabitha. Interesting, huh? That Sister Tabitha was called what? A disciple. Yeah? And she was what? A Christian too. So it's very inclusive, the word is not, it doesn't discriminate. It's very inclusive. Now, can a profession of faith qualify a person to be a disciple? Let's read here. There is a wide difference between a pretended union and a real connection with Christ by faith. A profession of the truth places men in the church, but this does not prove that they have a vital connection with the living vine. A rule is given by which the true disciple may be distinguished from those who claim to follow Christ but have not faith in him. The one class are fruit-bearing, the other fruitless. The one are often subjected to the pruning knife of God, that they may bring forth more fruit. The others, as withered branches, are ere long to be severed from the living vine. So this is, you can picture now the disciples, Jesus brought them together, but there was a work that needed to be done, which is called what? Pruning. And who does the pruning? It says a pruning knife. What is pruning? Well, pruning is what? It's a trim. It's a tree, a shrub, a brush by cutting away dead or overgrowth branches or a stem, especially to increase fruitlessness and growth. Okay? So, how many of you have done pruning? How many of you have done pruning at the wrong time? I have. Then you see the result of what you do. Yeah? I remember one time I had this, this prune tree actually, a plum tree. And there was a branch that was growing too much. And it was the branch that was bearing the most. But I was wondering, what do I do? You know, because the branch was pulling the tree actually. So, you know, the winter passed and I didn't cut the branch. I did it in the spring, at the beginning of the spring. And now, you know, I didn't know anything, so I cut the thing. And by the time I took the long branch away, take it somewhere else, and I came back, there was so much sap coming out of that branch. And I thought, wow, you know, I did this at the wrong time. And I didn't know what else to do to stop it. I just let it be. And it seems to me like the tree was crying because I did it at the wrong time. So I learned my lesson. But, you know, what is this pruning that God does? You know, pruning is, when you think about pruning, you think about, you know, maybe a chainsaw or a handsaw, things that you can use, or as clippers, but it cuts. You know, we were cleaning behind our shed, and there were a lot of branches and a lot of that vine that grows behind, and it goes all over the place. You name it, and it was hard. You know, you pull one branch, and you couldn't get it out because it was this vine was entangled with, and you had to cut here, cut there, and everything. So it was quite a job. But imagine God pruning us, the way that Jesus was trying to help the disciples prune those defects of character. Do you think that was easy? But now us, what are the tools that he uses? You know, Romans 8:35 at least spoke to me. Some of the things that God allows to come to us. Paul says, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation, distress, or persecution, famine, nakedness, or peril, or sword? Can those things be the means that God uses for pruning?
Sure.
Now let me ask you this following question. Which pruning would you prefer? Men's or God's pruning?
Well,
I think we would prefer whose?
God.
God's, right? Imagine somebody like me coming to prune you, that when I did it at the wrong time. Yeah, God can use, yes, that's correct.
No.
That's correct. But think about it, somebody that doesn't have no experience coming to help you prune your character. Will that work?
If it's not the instrument of God, it will not.
If you're not called.
Yeah, if you're not called to do that. Yeah. So, you know, look at the tools that men has devised to do pruning. There is all kinds of them. Which one would you prefer?
They all cut.
They all cut. Yes, they all cut. Little, big, small. You know, they all do some type of cutting. In Testimonies for the Church, Volume 4, page 354, it says, God is constantly pruning his people, cutting off profuse, spreading branches that they may bear fruit to his glory and not to produce leaves only. Now, what is God doing? Cutting off? What does the word profuse mean?
Too much.
No,
No?
no.
Refuse?
Profuse is the what? Extra?
Yeah, the meaning is that.
I understood that it can be also deep, you know, profuse. Okay, spreading branches that they may bear fruit to his glory and not to produce just leaves. God prunes us with what? Sorrow, disappointment, and affliction, that the outgrowth of strong, perverse traits of character may be weakened and that the better traits may have a chance to develop. But what are the tools that he uses? Notice this. I mean, do we like sorrow? No. Do we like to be disappointment? No. Do we like affliction? Much less. But those are the tools that he uses. For what reason? So we can, all those adverse traits of character can be removed so the better traits may have a chance to develop. Idols must be given up. The conscience must become more tender. The meditations of the heart must be spiritual. And the entire character must become symmetrical. This is why God does apply this pruning. Ask yourself the question now. Do we want to give a chance to God to let us prune our character so the better traits may come? Because, if I go to someone and tell them, brother, or sister, there is a problem here and we need to help you. Will that person like it? Most likely, it won't. Okay? But notice what is at stake here. What is the purpose of God in doing this pruning? We all have a conscience, right? It needs to become what? More tender, it says. Then it comes the meditation of the heart must be what? Spiritual. We have the tendency many times that our thoughts are somewhere else. So we need to bring them back to where they're supposed to be. And then the entire character will become symmetrical. Now, what's the aim of God's pruning? Let me keep reading here. It says, "And every branch that beareth fruit, he purges or pruneth, that he may bring forth more fruit. From the chosen 12 who have followed Jesus, one as a withered branch was about to be taken away. The rest were to pass under the pruning knife of bitter trial." Jesus, with solemn tenderness, explained the purpose of the husbandman. The pruning will cause pain, but it is the Father who applies the knife.
He knows.
Yes, he knows. But notice here, this pruning causes what? Pain. He works with no wanton hand or indifferent heart. There are branches trailing upon the ground. These must be cut loose from the earthly support to which their tendrils are fastening. They are to reach heavenward and find their support in God. The excessive foliage that draws away the life current from the fruit must be pruned off. The overgrowth must be cut out to give room for the healing beams of the Son of Righteousness. The husbandman prunes away the harmful growth that the fruit may be richer and more abundant. Can you imagine all the time, it's this 3.5 years of Jesus walking with the disciples. And they show their traits of character. I can't forget. You remember when Jesus took Peter, James, and John up to the mountain and Mount of Transfiguration. The others that were left behind, people brought their sick, but there was one that they could not help. He had a demoniac. When they returned, Jesus saw what was happening. And then the people came and asked, why was it that they could not do this? And the Tsar of Ages gives an explanation. You know what it was?
They were so jealous they couldn't stand it.
They were so jealous of the other three that they were not able to perform the miracle. They have done it before. But Jesus knew what he was doing in taking those three up there. So the same happened to every one of us. God is willing to use the right tools to prune from our heart those traits of character that need to be removed. But the greatest question is not whether God is willing to do it, The question is, are we willing to let him apply that pruning that he wants to do? May God help us, brethren, that we may think about this and let God work his way. And, we will be better Christians, definitely. People will see who we are. So may God be with us, brethren. Amen.